Hi, welcome to Gardening 101. I'm Melanie Hellier, Healthy Brandon Committee member and coordinator of Hummingbird Community Garden, the beautiful location that we're using today for our filming. Just to tell you a little bit about the program, spring is here and with it comes gardening season. Over the past 2 years, all the community gardens in Brandon have noticed an increase in new gardeners wanting to give their hand a try at gardening. Gardening not only offers food security, but also physical activity and social connectedness. And even during this time of pandemic, when we have the public health orders and limits on activity and gathering. So today we're going to sort of model that with our use of masks and our social distancing our physical distancing between us. It's also a way to be part of a community and to meet like-minded people, share gardening ideas and recipes, learn new ways of gardening, and enjoy working together to make the community garden a calming haven to retreat to, especially during these times of stress. So Healthy Brandon, which is also known as Healthy Together now provincially, and the City of Brandon are partnering to offer a free virtual workshop for those new to gardening, and it's called Gardening 101. So with me today is retired greenhouse operator Bev Logan, who's operated a greenhouse in Carroll for over 30 years. Bev tells me that she and her husband have been together for 55 years and they've been gardening that entire time, so she's a perfect facilitator to have today. She's got a wealth of information to share with us. She's going to tell you everything you need to know about planting your garden if you're new to gardening, from when to plant, how to plant, what tools to use, and a variety of other need to knows for gardening. If you sign up for the workshop, you'll receive a Veggie Packet, like this. Sign up quickly because supplies are limited, as well as a variety of information on local gardening resources in the Brandon area, and that'll be emailed to you. Seeds will be mailed, the resources will be emailed. Program is free of charge. Behind the scenes and with us here today is Justine Friesen. She's the recreation programmer with the Parks and Rec Services in the City of Brandon, and thanks Justine for being here and helping to make this possible too. So today it's a little cool day when we're filming. It's in May, but I know I always have lots of questions when people signed up for their community garden plot. They want to garden right away. And so Bev, the first question I'm going to have for you is, what's the best time of the year to plant garden? Is there a rule?
In the spring, everybody's eager to get their garden in. At the community garden, we have to wait to get it tilled and ready. But if you have your own garden, you can plant things earlier. Like you can plant your peas early. Peas don't mind the cold weather. And you can plant potatoes now because you plant them deep and they're a long time coming up. Like beans and cucumbers and things like that, they need be planted so that if there's frost, they will freeze. So if you're going to prepare your garden, usually we put some peat moss on top of the garden, and you can put a bit of manure that you can buy at one of the stores. And then if you've got a big enough garden, you can rototill it. But if you've got a small bed, like a raised bed, you have to take a shovel and turn it over. And you can just a minute till I get these. If you can, it should be worked about 5 inches deep so that your carrots will grow nice and long and they won't come to hard soil. But that is you can use a spade if you've got and this garden is quite soft, but it's best to have it worked about 5 inches deep. And that works in your manure and your peat moss.
Is there a risk of frost if you plant before May long weekend?
Some things maybe. Your potatoes would hardly be up by May long weekend. And if they're up, you can just take the hoe and you can just pull a bit of soil around them and they won't freeze. It doesn't usually freeze that hard in May.
Okay, but for some of the less hardy crops, they should probably be planted after the May long weekend?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Like your beans come up quickly and they would freeze if they're above ground, same as cucumbers. Okay. If you're going to plant lettuce, which I have seeds here today. You make a fairly shallow row in the garden because the seed is very, very fine. And it has to be planted thin, or else you'll have it'll be too thick and won't grow very good. So you just make a row, and I always put a stake at the end of each row so that lettuce and carrots take a while to come up. So just plant it very thinly on the row, and they're black so it's hard to see. You can also mix the fine seeds with soil, fine soil, or sand, and then you don't get them near as thick. Then you take the rake and just barely cover it because they're very fine and they don't come through a lot of soil. They need to be quite shallow. Then water your row so that they are sure to germinate. And keep it fairly moist so that the seeds germinate.
But don't overwater.
But don't overwater. No, you can overwater, and that's not necessary. And when you're watering, you can just water your rows to conserve water. You don't have to flood the whole bed or anything, just on the rows. Now the carrots you plant just the same as lettuce. And if you plant them too thick, then you have to thin some of them out, or you'll just have tiny little carrots like my finger. And they're just planted the exact same way as lettuce. And I usually put a few radishes in with my carrot seeds. They come up quickly and mark your row. And by the time you eat the radishes, the carrots are coming up in the row. And they're planted exactly the same as the lettuce, very thinly. Now the spinach is planted similar, but it's a little bigger seed, so it can be a little bit covered a little more. I usually dig the rows mostly the same depth and then just cover them gently. But the spinach is a little bigger, so you can plant it a little deeper, and but not too thick, or else things don't grow well if they're too thick. There isn't room for them to grow, so it's better to not put too many in the row.
And what about how close should it be to that other row that you planted?
Depending how big your garden is, how close you plant your rows. Now, if you've got a big garden, you don't have to worry. But if you've got a garden space with only so much area, which is new to me, then you have to plant them like about that, because that's all the room you've got. But on the farm, we planted like wide enough for the rototiller to go down, and this is so different for me.
So it depends what your space is.
Whatever your space is how you can plant your rows, but don't plant them any closer to that or they just don't seem to grow. Okay? With beans, you can grow both yellow and green beans. You can get bush or climbing ones. The bush ones are easier to manage because you have to put a fence up for the climbing beans. They produce equally as well, and don't plant your beans till after the May long weekend. They pop up quickly and they would freeze. But when you're planting beans, you dig the row about the same as you do for other things, and you plant them about 2 inches apart, or thereabouts. Sometimes quite often. I soak the beans overnight in water, and it just makes them grow quicker. They sprout quicker and they're ready to go. Now, with peas, they could be planted now. They're a cold weather crop. They could be in now. And with peas, you just dig a trench just the same. And I soak them overnight. You can do it without, but you have to keep the row well watered to get them to sprout because they're dry. And we always put a fence up for the peas to climb on because it's much easier to pick than trying to get on the ground and pick peas. And they're planted very much the same. Now they're covered up a little more, a little deeper than the carrots and the lettuce. And you just cover them over and water them because these have not been soaked. Now, if you choose to plant potatoes, be sure and buy potato seed, not the potatoes you eat, because most times they will not grow because they've been treated so they don't sprout in the bag in the grocery store. So we use a spade and we dig as deep as the spade will go, which if you've got a small place you'd have to use a hoe, but you can quite easily, about that deep. And the sprouts on the potato, as you can see, are getting quite big on this potato. We cut it so that there's 2 eyes in every cut you make. And there's a big one growing and a smaller one. You plant that right side up and cover it up, and it'll grow good. The only thing with potatoes, you have to watch for potato bugs. We seem to have potato bugs around in every garden. If you have your own garden, you can spray them. If we're in community gardens, we pick them. But those new potatoes are so good, it's well worth the effort to try and grow them.
Does diatomaceous earth work?
Yes, it will. Yeah, and it'd be okay to use, wouldn't it, diatomaceous earth?
Yes, it is.
Yes, you could use that.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, everybody wants some of those luscious tomatoes to make a tomato sandwich with. And I buy the plants. Of course, at the greenhouse, we always had hundreds of dozens of tomato plants, but I buy them now. This is just a single. You can buy them in 6-packs, which we do. But this is a patio tomato. It'll have tomatoes about this big, and they're really good. You can plant that in a pot at your deck or in a pail. You can plant it in any pot as long as there's a drainage hole in the bottom, or they'll drown. All pots need a hole in the bottom because sometimes we get too much rain, or sometimes we get too slap happy with the garden hose and they drown. So if you're going to plant tomato plants, dig a hole fairly deep. If your tomatoes get too big on you, dig the hole deeper and plant them so there's about that much of the tomato sticking out of the ground. In the bottom of the hole, I use powdered milk. You can use any form of calcium. I wouldn't really recommend milk, but you could, I guess. We've never used milk. But put about, quarter cup of calcium in the bottom of your hole. You could still put a bit more manure in there if you wanted, but don't get overzealous with the manure or you'll have all tops and no tomatoes.
You could use compost as well?
Yeah, you could use compost in there, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Tums for the calcium? Could you use Tums?
You could use Tums for the calcium as well. So we've always just bought powdered milk on the farm. We had bags of calcium for the cattle. So anyhow, there's the tomato plant, and we got the calcium in the bottom. So we will plant it, but not till after the long weekend, because they freeze very, very easily. When we plant tomatoes, you can use a pot with no bottom, or you can use a milk jug that's washed and cut it off, or a carton, and put it around. And that just helps protect the tomato plant from the weather. And usually we do it right away. We put a tomato cage around it, because if you don't, you kind of forget and they get big, and then it's really difficult to get the tomato cage around. If you put it around when you plant the tomatoes, it seems to work much easier. They just grow around in through the tomato cage, and there they are. Now we put them, well, leave about 6 inches between the tomato cages, and then as many as you want. We planted 15 here last year, and we canned 60 pints of tomatoes off those plants.
Wow.
So you don't need a ton of tomatoes, but if you're not going to can them, you can freeze them as well. But I have better luck canning them. And be sure and keep your tomato watered. The calcium and the regular water keep them from having blossom and rot. So,
Do they prefer water from the top or from the bottom of the plant?
I water from the top. When you've got these pots around, I fill them about half full, and then it just soaks down to the roots, and you don't have to water as often as if you watered around them and tried to get them to the bottom.
Okay. Been a wealth of information. We've learned, what type of seeds to plant, how far to plant them, when to plant them in the season. We've learned about using peat moss and compost and calcium for tomatoes. Wealth of information. Thank you very much, Bev.
If you want to buy garden tools, don't go and buy a whole bunch. You need a hoe and a little rake or a digger or something, and a little digger. But you'll know as you go along, if you've never gardened before, how to buy tools.
Right. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be expensive
No.
to start out gardening.
No.
Package of seeds, some water. You mentioned, if you can get into one of the community gardens, that's great. If you have your own spot at home, that's great. But if you can grow it from, say, a pot like that, or a refrigerant container, or a pot that you have at home, as long as you have the holes in the bottom.
Yes.
So gardening doesn't have to be an expensive hobby, but it can be a fun hobby and a way to feed your family, right?
Right.
Good. Well, thank you. I also wanted to mention, Bev showed us some of the seeds that we'll be giving away in the free package. She also showed us the tomato and the potato. Those aren't the ones you're going to get in the package if you register. So I hope you've registered. Thanks for viewing the video. I hope you've registered. And what you'll be getting in the package are the beans that Bev planted, carrots, lettuce, spinach, and peas. And like I say,